Hey everyone, I'm Ethan Miller. I'm 42 years old, a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. The story I'm about to tell, it isn't easy, but I think it needs to be shared. It started during the final days of my most recent deployment at a dusty, scorching hot base somewhere in the Middle East. The air was always thick with the smell of sand and diesel fuel, and the distant roar of aircraft became part of daily life. We counted down the days until we could go home. For me, home was Spokane, Washington. That's where Chloe, my wife, was. 13 years we'd been together. 13 years seemed long enough to build a solid foundation. That day, I had just finished a long, exhausting patrol. The desert sun was still beating down even though it was starting to set. I sat on my creaky cot, sweat still damp on my forehead, planning to catch a quick nap before dinner. My phone vibrated softly in my pocket. Usually, it was an update from the unit, or sometimes, the brief check-in message from Chloe I always looked forward to. But this time, the screen lit up with a different notification. A text from Chloe. I opened it and read. It wasn't words of love. It wasn't asking how I was doing. Just a few short lines, cold enough to send a chill down my spine. Ethan, we need to talk. I don't think I can do this anymore. I filed for divorce. I believe this is best for both of us. I read it again and again. The words swam before my eyes. Divorce? Over text? While I was halfway around the world. It felt like someone had just sucked all the air out of my lungs. My ears were ringing. The usual noise of the barracks suddenly silent. A few seconds later, another notification popped up from my banking app. Our joint account balance was almost zero. Just a few bucks left. I sat there, motionless, the phone suddenly feeling heavy as lead in my hand. The ground beneath me, or rather, the temporary flooring of the base, seemed to shake. Everything was spinning. 13 years of marriage, our future plans, the house we built together, all gone in a few lines of text and a tap on her phone screen. One of my buddies walked by, clapped me on the shoulder. Hey Miller, you look like you've seen a ghost. Something wrong? I managed to swallow hard, shook my head. It's nothing, just some stuff back home. I didn't want anyone to see me like this. Didn't want to explain. This pain was too private, too sudden. I put the phone away, stood up, trying my best to look normal. That night, I barely slept. The image of the text message and that near-zero balance haunted my thoughts. What was really happening back home? Lying on my cot, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind kept replaying the months before I left for this deployment. Maybe I was just blind, or maybe I deliberately chose not to see the truth. Thinking back now, the signs were there, clear as day. I had just ignored them. About 6 months before this deployment, Chloe started to change. Small things, at first. Things I initially chalked up to stress from her admin job at the dental clinic, or maybe worry about my upcoming tour. She became more easily irritated over nothing. The questions about my day grew less frequent, replaced by sudden, overtime shifts. She started going to the gym 3 times a week, but strangely, she never seemed tired or sweaty when she got back. Then came the new, more expensive clothes than usual. New friends I'd never met, whose names she only mentioned in passing. Her phone suddenly had a new password, something we'd never had between us before. My heart tightens now remembering the times she flinched when I happened to glance at her screen. It's not in my nature to be suspicious or nitpicky. I was raised to trust, especially my spouse. I didn't check her messages or follow her around. That's just not who I am. But my gut wasn't quiet. There was this vague, growing sense of unease. A soldier's intuition, the same thing that had saved my life on the battlefield more than once, was screaming that something wasn't right, that something was coming. So, I took quiet action. Not to confront, but to prepare. I rented a small storage unit on the other side of town. Quietly moved the most important documents there. My birth certificate, our marriage license, and crucially, the deed to our house. The house was legally only in my name because I used my VA loan, a benefit specifically for veterans. Still, when we bought it, I'd added her name to the deed because that's what married couples do. I also moved my military benefit paperwork, my grandfather's old watch, and some heirloom silver from my mother into the unit. Things with sentimental value, things that couldn't be replaced. I also opened a separate bank account at a different bank and started diverting a small portion of my monthly paycheck there. Not enough that she'd notice, but enough that I wouldn't be starting from absolute zero if the worst happened. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed this preparation was unnecessary. The day I left for the airport, Chloe hugged me. A brief, detached hug. Stay safe. Okay, she said, her eyes looking away. Her eyes were dry, not a single tear. Like she was saying goodbye to a coworker going on a business trip, not a husband heading into a war zone. Right then, I should have known. But part of me still stubbornly hoped. Now, lying here on this remote base, facing the divorce text and the empty bank account, I knew I hadn't been wrong. The pain was still there, but mixed with it was a cold clarity. Chloe didn't know I had prepared for this moment. And what she didn't understand was, I've never been one to start fights, but once one begins, I finish it. A few days after the initial shock, I tried to pull myself together. The pain was still there, a raw, fresh wound. But the logic of a soldier trained to face adversity started kicking in. I needed to know exactly what had happened to our money. The joint account had barely $20 left, but what about the savings account? We had managed to save a decent amount over the years, around $47,000. That was sweat and tears, plans for the future, for home improvements, for trips when I finally retired. I found a spot on base with a more stable internet connection, opened my laptop, and logged into our online banking. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the number. Savings account, $0, 0 cents. Completely empty. The transaction history showed a series of large transfers, starting just one day after I left Spokane for this deployment. The money had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize at all. $47,000, plus nearly everything from our joint account, all gone. A cold anger started seeping into my veins, replacing the initial numb pain. This wasn't just a sudden decision to divorce. This was a calculated move, a blatant financial betrayal. When had she planned this? Before I even left? Or right after I was gone? I needed to talk to the bank. Waiting until business hours back in the States, I went to the base phone center, where the lines were more secure. The call lasted nearly half an hour. The bank representative confirmed what I'd already seen. Chloe, as co-owner of the account, had initiated the transfers. Small amounts at first, maybe testing the waters. Then, as soon as I'd set foot in the combat zone, large sums started moving out systematically until there was nothing left. They couldn't provide information about the receiving account without a court order, but they confirmed the transactions were made by Chloe. I hung up and just stood there in the noisy hallway of the phone center. Other soldiers around me were laughing, talking on the phone with their wives, kids, parents. Snippets of normal life conversations, weekend plans, kids' laughter, floated past my ears like daggers twisting in my gut. Their worlds were still turning, while mine was falling apart. Just then, Wilson, my bunkmate and a reliable soldier who'd helped me out of a tight spot in Kandahar once, found me. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his voice low and concerned. "Alvarez said you looked like you'd seen a ghost at dinner. What's up?" Normally, I keep personal stuff to myself, but right then, I needed to say something, even just a part of it. I looked at Wilson, the friend I'd literally trusted my life with. "My wife," I said, my voice hoarse. "She cleaned out our accounts, moved her boyfriend into my house, and sent me a divorce text last week while I was on patrol." Wilson didn't offer the usual platitudes like, "I'm sorry," or "That's rough," or "You'll find someone better." He just looked me straight in the eye, was quiet for a moment, and then asked the only question that mattered. "What's your plan?" "Not sure yet," I replied. He nodded. "Let me know if you need anything." That was it. But that silent support meant the world to me right then. I wasn't alone in this mess. That night, sleep completely eluded me. The pain, the anger, the sense of betrayal swirled inside me. But overriding it all, a cold determination began to form. I couldn't just sit here and let this happen. I needed more information. I needed proof. Then I remembered. The security camera system. About a year ago, after a petty theft in the neighborhood, I'd installed a pretty decent security camera system myself, inside and out. The kind you can access remotely via the internet, with cloud storage. Chloe knew about it, but maybe in the haze of her new romance and her plan to take the money, she must have forgotten that crucial detail. Or maybe she just thought I was too far away to do anything. I opened my laptop and logged into the security account. It took a few seconds for the images to load. The camera covering the front of the house showed a strange pickup truck, dark blue, parked in my driveway. A truck I'd never seen before. I switched to the living room camera. My chest tightened, like someone was squeezing my heart. An unfamiliar man was walking around my living room. Tall, blonde hair, wearing the Seattle Seahawks hoodie I loved, the one I always wore on weekends. He was holding my coffee mug, the ceramic one I bought on a work trip. Our German shepherd, Max, was happily wagging his tail at his feet, acting friendly. I switched again to the kitchen camera. Chloe was standing there, leaning against the kitchen counter. I'd installed the granite on myself during my last leave. She was laughing. A bright, easy laugh. The other man walked in, wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. They said something, then laughed together loudly. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't exactly the explosive anger I might have expected. It was something colder, clearer, like a thick fog had suddenly lifted, revealing the raw, ugly truth. The sadness seemed to evaporate, replaced by intense focus. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app. I started typing, line by line, like I was planning a military operation. Called David Chun, old friend, lawyer. Double-check the terms of the VA, Veterans Affairs, loan. Contact Master Sergeant about emergency leave possibility. Find refinance documents for the house. Chloe mentioned something offhand last year about better rates. Check security on military pension accounts. Make sure no one can touch those. I read the list again. I didn't feel sad anymore. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt focused. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about strategy. I needed to act smart, be methodical. 5 a.m. Before my shift started, I sent an email to David Chun from my personal account, using the base's secure network. Subject: need legal help. Discreet and urgent. Less than an hour later, his reply came. Call me. Use secure line only. The conversation with David that followed laid out the path I needed to take. No yelling needed. No threats. Didn't even need to confront Chloe directly right now. I just needed to wait, watch, and let her own actions become the trap. 2 months after that fateful text message, I was back on American soil. My deployment ended a bit earlier than planned, but I had solid grounds for emergency leave after my call with David. I didn't tell Chloe I was coming back. No calls, no texts. The flight landed at Spokane International Airport late one afternoon. The sky was overcast with a light drizzle, a stark contrast to the scorching sun of the Middle East. I didn't go home. That house wasn't my home anymore. Not right now, anyway. I grabbed a taxi and asked the driver to take me to a budget motel downtown, far from my neighborhood. I checked in under a different name, paid cash. The room was small, clean but impersonal, with a faint smell of disinfectant. It would be my temporary base of operations in the coming fight. The first thing I did after settling in was contact David Chun. We arranged to meet the next morning at a small, family-style diner about 10 miles outside the city center, a place where we wouldn't likely be noticed. David arrived on time, sliding into the booth across from me. He took one look at me, his expression concerned. You look like hell, Ethan. Feel like it too, I replied, taking a sip of strong black coffee. David got straight to business. He pushed a thick folder across the table. Everything we discussed over the phone is in here. House deed, bank statements, VA loan details. He paused, pulling out a separate paper. And there's this. Found something interesting when I dug into your finances. It was a refinance application for the house, submitted about 3 months ago, right after I deployed. The purpose was to pull out about $30,000 in cash equity. The problem was the signature. My name was there, but it wasn't my signature. It was close. Someone had clearly tried to copy it, but details were off that only I, or an expert, would spot. My middle initial was wrong, and the stroke pattern wasn't mine. Chloe did this. I asked, though I pretty much already knew the answer. David nodded. 3 months ago. To get that money, she needed your signature because the VA loan is solely in your name. So she forged my signature. I finished, a bitter taste in my throat. Forged my signature, took out a loan against my own house, then cleaned out our bank accounts and texted me for a divorce. Quite the busy woman. The sarcasm in my own voice surprised me. It gets worse, David said, his tone serious. She listed the new boyfriend, Rick Stevens, as a co-applicant. What? I almost shot out of my seat. Yeah. And I did a quick background check on this Rick guy. He has a record. 2 DUIs and a fraud charge from 2019, though it looks like that one was settled somehow. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. This was even worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was a calculated financial conspiracy involving someone with a criminal past. What are my options now, David? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Several, David replied. But first, you need to decide what you want. I thought for a moment. The image of Chloe laughing with that guy in my house, the empty bank accounts, the forged signature. It all flashed through my mind. I want what's legally mine back. And I want her and that guy to understand the consequences of what they've done. David gave a slight, professional smile, but there was determination in his eyes. All right then, here's what we do. The next day, I drove the cheap rental car past my old neighborhood, past the house that used to be mine. The blue pickup truck belonging to Rick wasn't there, but Chloe's car was parked out front. Part of me wanted to stop, knock on the door, confront her, scream all my anger and pain in her face. But that wasn't the plan. David's plan, and now mine, required patience and strategy, not emotional outbursts. I drove to the bank branch that had processed the fraudulent refinance application. I had made an appointment with the branch manager. Sitting across from him in his private office, I calmly explained the situation. I presented my military ID, my driver's license with my real signature. Then, I placed the copy of the refinance application with the forged signature on his desk. The manager examined the documents, comparing the two signatures. His face slowly changed color, from surprise to concern, then turned pale. "Oh my God," he stammered. "This signature, it's clearly not the same. I'll have to report this to our security and legal departments immediately." "I understand," I replied, my voice steady. "And I've already filed a police report regarding the forgery and fraud." My calmness seemed to unsettle him further. He apologized profusely and promised full cooperation. I left the bank feeling a small measure of relief that the first step of the plan was in motion. That night, my phone started buzzing and ringing nonstop. Text from Chloe. "Ethan, what are you doing? The bank just called me asking about the home loan application. They said something about verifying signatures. What's going on?" Another text. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering me?" Then a missed call. Another text. "If this is about the divorce, we can talk about this like adults." Like adults. The exact same phrase she'd used in her first text demanding a divorce. Her audacity almost made me laugh out loud bitterly. I chose silence. The phone kept buzzing. I turned off the ringer and placed it face down on the table. The following afternoon, David called me. "Good news, Ethan. The bank has frozen the funds from that fraudulent refinance. They're conducting an internal investigation." He paused. "And there's more. Remember your wife's boyfriend, Rick Stevens?" "How could I forget?" I replied dryly. "He got pulled over this morning driving your pickup truck." "My truck?" I frowned. The pickup was still registered in my name. That's right. Turns out his license was suspended because of those prior DUIs. The police impounded the vehicle. "Good," I said, a cold sense of satisfaction creeping in. "That's not all," David continued, his voice turning more serious. "When they searched the impounded truck, the police found something interesting. A couple of blank prescription pads, the kind used for controlled substances, from the dental office where Chloe works." I closed my eyes, trying to process this. "You mean she stole prescription pads for him?" "Looks that way. The police are investigating that angle now. Seems this Rick character isn't just involved in financial fraud." I hung up and sat down on the edge of the cheap motel bed. This was getting more complicated and darker than I could have imagined. Not just an affair, not just stolen money, but now possibly stolen prescription pads, a serious crime. Part of me, an old habit from 13 years of marriage, wanted to call Chloe, warn her about the danger she was in with this guy. But then the image of her laughing with him in my kitchen flashed back. The empty bank accounts. The forged signature. No, this was the path she'd chosen. I couldn't turn back now. And honestly, I didn't want to. The next morning, as arranged by David, I met with Mr. Thompson, the bank's fraud investigator. He was a short guy, looked pretty tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. "This happens more often than you'd think, Sergeant," Mr. Thompson said, spreading documents across his desk. "Spouse deploys. The one back home sees an opportunity." He shook his head wearily. "So what happens now?" I asked, getting straight to the point. "We've frozen the remaining funds from the fraudulent refinance. But there's a problem. Some of the money had already been moved before we could act." My heart sank. "How much?" "About half. $14,600. $14,600. Gone." "Where did it go?" I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Thompson hesitated. "Technically, I'm not supposed to share that information. That's my house." I interrupted, my voice firm. "My name was forged. My money was stolen. You need to tell me." He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed and nodded. He turned his computer screen towards me. These are the transfers out of the refinance account. I scanned the list, my eyes narrowing. Multiple small transfers, but two large ones were made out to a name I'd never heard before, Mark Jennings. Not Rick Stevens. Someone completely unknown. Who is Mark Jennings? I asked. Not my department, Mr. Thompson shrugged. But you should have your lawyers subpoena these records. I thanked Mr. Thompson and left the bank immediately. As soon as I got to my car, I called David. Mark Jennings, I said as soon as he picked up. The money from the refinance was transferred to a guy named Mark Jennings. Mark Jennings, huh? David repeated. Let me check him out. About an hour later, David called back, his voice filled with discovery. Got it. Mark Jennings is a real estate agent here in Spokane. Specializes in quick sales, cash deals, usually below market value. A real estate agent? I tried to connect the dots. So Chloe and Rick were planning to sell my house. The harsh realization hit me like a physical blow. Looks that way, David confirmed. That $14,600 was probably earnest money or a retainer fee to get Jennings moving on listing the house. But here's where it gets interesting. This Mark Jennings has done business with Rick Stevens before. They're connected? Exactly. They've closed at least 3 real estate deals together in the past 2 years. And here's the kicker. Ethan, I dug deeper into this Rick Stevens character. He seems to have a very specific MO. What kind of MO? He targets women going through emotional turmoil, especially those getting divorced or whose spouses are deployed, particularly military personnel like you. I found 3 similar cases in neighboring states. Each time, the woman's house gets sold quickly, well below market value, to one of Mark Jennings' cash clients. Rick gets a hefty commission, then disappears, leaving the woman holding the bag legally and financially. I sank onto a nearby park bench, my head spinning. So, this wasn't just Chloe leaving me for some guy. This was an organized scam. Could be, David said cautiously. And Chloe? Did she know about this? Or was she just another victim manipulated by Rick? Hard to say, David replied. Maybe she was manipulated, or maybe she was in on it. But either way, her forging your signature and taking the money is undeniable. I rubbed my face, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. This had gone far beyond personal betrayal. It was bigger, more calculated, and frighteningly, it targeted people like me, soldiers serving overseas, leaving their families and homes behind, trusting in their safety and loyalty. Other military families had been victims. What do we do now, David? My voice was firm with resolve. I've already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, David said. This has federal implications, crossing state lines, targeting active duty military personnel, involving a government-backed VA loan. They're very interested. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, nursing a beer and staring out the window. The streetlights cast long, dim shadows in the room. I thought about 13 years of marriage. Had Chloe been playing me all along? Or did she just get swept up when she met a predator like Rick? And did it even matter anymore? The phone on the nightstand buzzed again. A text from Chloe. Ethan, please call me back. The bank keeps talking about fraud, and Rick got arrested for driving your truck. I don't understand what's happening. I stared at the message for a long time. The feigned innocence made me sick. I slowly typed a reply. Who is Mark Jennings? 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then stopped. Appeared again. Stopped. It took several minutes. Finally, the message came through. I don't know what you're talking about. I typed back. $14,600. Multiple transfers. House listing. Another long pause. Nearly 10 minutes this time. Then the final message. It's not what you think. I turned off my phone. There was nothing more to say. Now it was time for the FBI. The next morning, David called with news. The FBI wants to meet with you. They said they've been investigating Rick Stevens and Mark Jennings for a few months now. Your case isn't the first, but it might be the key piece they need to break the whole thing open. For the first time since getting that divorce text back in the Middle East, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because my marriage had ended tragically, but because the truth was finally about to come out. Justice not just for me, but potentially for other military families they'd preyed upon. I met with 2 FBI agents, Patel and Donovan, at their field office in Spokane. They were professionals, getting straight to the point. I recounted the entire story, from the divorce text, discovering the empty accounts, the forged signature, to everything David and I had uncovered about Rick, Jennings, and their predatory scheme. I provided them with copies of all the documents, bank statements, property records, the storage unit information, and even the login details for my home security camera system. Sergeant Miller's case is crucial, Agent Patel explained. It helps us establish a clear criminal pattern, demonstrates intent and organized conspiracy, turning what might seem like isolated incidents into a large-scale fraud operation. What about my wife, my ex-wife? I asked, hesitating slightly. Whatever she had done, some small part of me still felt a vague concern about her fate. The two agents exchanged glances. We're still determining Ms. Miller's level of involvement, Donovan said carefully. Did she ever mention financial difficulties? Or pressure to sell the house? I thought back. About 6 months before I deployed, I replied, she started making comments about us being house poor, that the house was too big, we should downsize. I didn't pay much attention at the time. My salary easily covered the mortgage payments. About 6 months ago, Patel noted it down. That's likely around the time she would have met Rick Stevens. Very possible. And the refinance? Donovan asked. Did she ever discuss it with you? Never, I stated firmly. She forged my signature while I was deployed. They asked many more detailed questions, taking careful notes. When we finished, Agent Patel handed me her card. We'll be in touch. In the meantime, it's critical that you do not confront your ex-wife or Rick Stevens directly. We need time to build this case airtight. Understood, I nodded. Roger that. Military instinct kicked in automatically. That evening, I drove back to my old neighborhood again, just to watch from a distance. Rick's blue pickup truck was back, parked in my driveway. He must have made bail and gotten the truck out of impound. Chloe's car was gone. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. Ethan, we really need to talk in person. Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow around noon. The next morning, I showed the text to David over breakfast at our usual diner. Don't go, David advised immediately. Nothing good can come from talking to her right now. Let the FBI handle it. I'm not going to meet her, I said. But I want to know what she's up to today, while she thinks I'm on my way to the park. 9:30 a.m., we drove near my house, parking across the street, hidden behind some large trees. Right on schedule, at 9:45, Chloe walked out of the house, got in her car, and drove off, heading towards Riverfront Park, just as expected. Now what? David asked. Now we wait. I replied, my eyes fixed on the house. About 20 minutes later, a sleek silver sedan pulled up in front of the house. A real estate company logo was on the door. Mark Jennings. Rick Stevens came out of the house to greet him. They chatted briefly on the lawn, then both went inside. Should we follow them? David asked quietly, sounding a bit nervous. I shook my head, a cold smile touching my lips. No need. I installed security cameras last year. Interior and exterior. They all upload automatically to cloud storage. David raised his eyebrows in surprise. You never mentioned that before. Never came up, I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the security app, angling the screen so David could see. The crisp image from the living room camera appeared. Jennings was walking around, holding a tablet, apparently taking photos or notes. Rick followed behind him, pointing out features of the house, the fireplace, the large bay window overlooking the backyard. I turned up the volume on my phone. Jennings' voice came through clearly. Should list by the end of the week. I've already got an interested buyer lined up. Cash offer, as usual. How much? Rick's voice asked. Around $420,000, Jennings replied. We list at $470. They offer $420. Everybody's happy. What about the husband? Rick asked, a hint of apprehension in his voice. Chloe says he's causing trouble. Jennings scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Military guys are all the same. They make noise at first, but they're busy with deployments, responsibilities. Eventually, he'll take some settlement just to make it go away. I turned to David. His eyes were wide. Are you recording this? David was already screen recording the feed on his own phone. Every word, he confirmed. Immediately, I forwarded the live security feed access to Agent Patel, along with a short text message. Happening right now. Conspiracy to sell house. Discussing fraud. Less than 30 minutes later, my quiet neighborhood was suddenly swarming. FBI vehicles, marked and unmarked, silently surrounded the house from multiple directions. David and I sat quietly in the car, watching from down the street. Agents in light body armor, weapons ready, moved quickly towards the house. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Mark Jennings and Rick Stevens were led out in handcuffs, their faces pale and stunned, escorted by agents into separate vehicles. My phone rang. It was Agent Patel. We got them red-handed, Miller, her voice was calm but firm, recorded the whole discussion about the fraudulent scheme, conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempting to sell property under false pretenses. We'll need a formal statement from you as soon as possible. Of course, I replied. Oh, and Sergeant, Patel added, your ex-wife just arrived on the scene. She seems distressed. I looked down the street. Chloe's car had just pulled up a short distance away. She got out, hands covering her mouth, standing frozen on a neighbor's lawn, her eyes wide with horror as she watched FBI agents carrying boxes of documents out of the house that used to be ours. What happens to her? I asked, my voice softer now. That depends, Patel replied. Depends on what she knew, and depends on what you want. I watched Chloe from a distance for a long moment. 13 years of marriage. There had been good years, at the beginning, before everything turned into this mess. I took a deep breath. I just want what's right, I said finally. Justice needs to be served. The federal case moved surprisingly fast. Faced with irrefutable evidence, especially the damning recording from the security cameras, both Rick Stevens and Mark Jennings knew they were cornered. Instead of going to trial and facing potentially much longer sentences, both chose to take plea deals. They implicated each other and several other conspirators in what the FBI described as a sophisticated fraud ring operating across 3 states, specifically targeting military families and other vulnerable individuals. Chloe's situation was a bit more complicated. She insisted she knew nothing about the larger scope of the fraud scheme. She claimed Rick had convinced her that I was the one hiding money, that I was planning to leave her with nothing, that the refinance was Rick's idea to protect her financially, and she just went along with it out of trust and fear. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. I wasn't sure I even wanted to know the definitive answer anymore. Seeing her break down in hysterics at the scene that day, and later during meetings with lawyers, I didn't feel hatred anymore. Just exhaustion and a kind of hollow sadness. She had walked herself down this path. David drafted a divorce settlement and civil agreement. To avoid facing criminal prosecution alongside Rick and Jennings, Chloe agreed to all the terms. Full restitution of all the money taken from the joint and savings accounts, plus the $14,600 transferred to Jennings from the fraudulent refinance. She had to borrow heavily from her family to come up with it. She also had to completely forfeit any claim to the house in Spokane and any portion of my future military pension. Crucially, she had to sign a formal confession admitting she had forged my signature on the refinance application. In exchange, I agreed not to push for the prosecutor's office to pursue criminal charges against her in the case involving Rick and Jennings. Our divorce was finalized just 6 months after that text message from Kandahar. A no-fault and on paper, a clean break. All things considered. No more ties. On the day the last papers were signed, I received a call from Agent Patel. Rick Stevens was sentenced today, Sergeant Miller. 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Mark Jennings got 12 years. Thought you'd want to know. Thank you, Agent, for letting me know, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Justice, however slow, had finally caught up with the masterminds. One more thing, Patel added. During the expanded investigation, we found evidence they'd run similar scams on 11 other military families. Your case was instrumental in helping us build the pattern and charge them. Thanks to you, those families might have a chance to get their money back. After hanging up, I sat quietly on the worn chair in my temporary apartment, looking out the window. 11 other families. 11 other soldiers who might have returned from deployment to find their homes gone, their accounts emptied. I never intended to be some accidental hero taking down a criminal ring. I just wanted what was mine. But sometimes, life leads you down unexpected paths. Maybe my own suffering had brought something good to others. My phone buzzed softly. A text from Chloe. The first one since everything blew up. I never wanted things to end this way. I looked at the words for a long time. Then I turned off the screen. Didn't reply. Between us, there was truly nothing left to say. A year passed since the divorce was finalized. I sold the house in Spokane. There was no way I could keep living within those walls. Every corner held memories, both good and bad, but now the pain and betrayal overshadowed everything. It wasn't my home anymore. The money from the house sale, combined with the restitution from Chloe and the savings I had quietly set aside, gave me a fresh start. I made a big decision. I took early retirement from the Army. 20 years of service was enough. I'd given enough. It was time to live for myself. I found my way to Montana. Big sky country, wild and quiet. I used the money to buy a small, cozy log cabin tucked away outside Missoula. 2 bedrooms, 10 acres of land, with a small creek bubbling behind the house. No neighbors in sight for miles. Just me, the trees, and the vast open sky. I adopted a German shepherd from the local rescue shelter, named him Scout. He became my loyal companion, always at my feet wherever I went. To keep my hands and mind busy, I took up woodworking. Simple stuff mostly: chairs, tables, bookshelves for folks in the small nearby town. The work wasn't fancy, but it was therapeutic, and it brought in a little extra income. My military pension covered the rest of the basics. My life slowed down considerably. No more sudden alerts, stressful watches, long deployments. Instead, there were birds singing in the morning, the rustle of trees in the wind, Scout barking excitedly at a squirrel darting across the yard. Peaceful. A kind of peace I had craved for a long time. Occasionally, I still thought about Chloe. Wondered how she was, what she was doing. David had heard she moved back to her hometown in Oregon, working at another dental office. Starting over too, I guess. I didn't hate her anymore. Honestly, I didn't feel much about her at all. She'd made her choices, and so had I. The past was behind me. One fall afternoon, checking my mailbox, I found a letter with an unfamiliar return address from Fort Worth, Texas. Curious, I opened it. It was from a woman I'd never met. Her husband was in the Navy, deployed, when Rick Stevens and Mark Jennings tried to run their scam on her family. The FBI had given her my name as part of the case file. "Dear Sergeant Miller," she wrote in neat handwriting. "You don't know me, but I'm writing to thank you. You saved our home. You stood up and fought back when it probably would have been easier to just walk away. Because of you, those men were brought to justice, and families like ours were protected. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts." I read the letter twice. A warm feeling spread through my chest. I walked inside, took a magnet, and pinned the letter to my refrigerator door, right next to a picture of Scout. Sometimes, on long rainy days, when the silence in the cabin felt too loud, or when old memories flickered unexpectedly, I'd look at that letter. It reminded me that even from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak, something good could arise. That my actions, born from personal pain, had somehow made a bigger difference. I heard Rick and Jennings were still in prison. The system, at least this time, had worked. As for me, I was finding my way forward. One quiet day at a time, in the stillness of the Montana mountains. I was building something new. A simple, honest life. A solid foundation that couldn't be stolen, forged, or betrayed. Something that was just mine. And this time, I would protect it.